Lord, we ask for your blessing upon this day. We ask for your guidance, for your Holy Spirit. And we especially ask now for your presence as we ponder some more of your truth. And Lord, I pray that you'll speak through me. May this be only your words and your thoughts. And may it speak to our hearts in exactly the way that it needs to come. May it impact us individually. May your Spirit translate the words to make them apply to each one of us individually. We thank you again for this time, and we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. It was May 18, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 2017. That's this year, for those of you who are challenged with dates, as I am. I stepped out of the office at Kibidula Primary School, finished up a meeting with the teachers, and said goodbye to a couple of friends, swung my leg over my motorcycle, and started driving home. And for those of you who think that motorcycles are dangerous, I agree. But in third world countries, sometimes that's all you have to drive. So that's what I was driving. And a couple minutes later, I saw another motorcycle coming around the curve. Well, I'll stop the story there for just a minute. What was I doing at Kibidula? I had come on the invitation of Kibidula Mission. Kibidula is a large institute that has its goal in true education. They run 3 schools, actually. One for primary students with about 145 students. One for older teenage students, at-risk students of about 60 students there, doing an amazing work in true education. They run a lay evangelism and health evangelism training school, doing a great work. But their primary school was struggling because it was functioning just as any other government school. They invited me to come and do what I could to help, so I volunteered some time earlier this year. We wanted to do what we could to help this function according to the Lord's plan. And it was a beautiful situation because the administration was completely on board. It was just a matter of convincing the teachers, which we soon realized was a challenge. But it quickly became apparent that this would be no easy task. The devil was not going to let this one go without a struggle. On the agenda, we had a schedule change to allow for more hands-on learning and outdoor time. We wanted to develop an agriculture program that would involve every student, not just a few, not just certain classes, but every student involved in agriculture every day. We wanted to develop a practical and vocational training program that would give the students skills that they needed, that they could use in their lives as adults. And we also wanted to educate the teachers along the lines of true education and teaching them how to teach well, how to connect with their students, how to reach their hearts, how to follow the counsel that we have. It was a big project. There were many more things that we wanted to do, but this was a start. These changes proved to be very difficult, however. It seemed every day presented a new challenge, and it kept us on our knees quite a bit. While the Kibidula administration was completely supportive, an unwilling spirit was quickly found in many of the teachers. Afternoon meetings to learn about true education? Only if you pay me for my time, they said. Spend time with the students during the breaks? Well, that's not what I was hired for. Teach in the garden? I wasn't hired for that either. Teach practical skills? That's not my expertise. So we faced some challenges there. The first week, though, that we finally got some teacher cooperation and agreed to begin afternoon training sessions, I was nailed with the worst case of the flu I've ever had. The only time I ever got sick while there. I think Satan had a hand there. The schedule change was a real struggle because of government restrictions, but we were able to work around it fairly well. So we began the work. It was moving forward slowly. To start an agriculture and practical skills training program that required a lot of money, over $10,000. How would we come up with this? Well, Satan was there to make that look pretty impossible. But the Lord owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, and he must have sold a few cows because we soon had all the money we needed, and more than we thought we needed, actually. To start an agriculture program in the middle of the African rainy season, though, is a totally different story. But we pushed forward, and soon we had some new ground broken. This was a garden plot here for about two classes. We had some trees to get rid of. The students pitched in and helped. Does that look heavy? It is. That's green eucalyptus. There's no way I could carry that. That was quite amazing to me. The students had fun, though. I realized, though, it was the students that were quite on board with this new program. The teachers, on the other hand, were the issue that we had. But despite rain and equipment breakdowns and many things that I don't even remember, it seemed like every day we had yet another problem. But we pressed forward. We had to burn some brush off the field to be able to plow it. That's pretty hard to do when it's raining every single day. But the Lord provided 2 days without rain, and we got that done. And soon we had this garden plot here for 6 more classes, as well as an orchard area. In order to have a vocational skills training program, we needed a building to do it in because the classrooms were too small, and buildings are quite expensive. But the Lord provided money. I met with the director, and we laid plans. He said, though, but this will be quite a while before we can get our workers pulled off from other projects to start working on this project. I was disappointed. I went back to the school, though. 2 days later, a truck pulled into the school. It was the building crew. "We're here to start building," they told me. I said, "Build what?" "Well, I don't know," they said. "We were told you would know." I said, "Great, let's start in the vocational skills building." I thought it would be weeks, but within 2 days, we were working on that new building. Progress this is one of the latest pictures I have from a couple of months ago. But really, it's not about the pictures there. There's a lot more I could show. But the point is that in spite of some real difficulties, we were making progress. And it was a real challenge. There were many problems. I don't remember all of them. I tend to be an optimistic person that just moves past them. So I'm sure if I talked to other friends that were there, they'd be like, "Wow, you're missing a lot of the difficulties we faced." And that was true. I remember it had been about 3 months, though, and things were finally looking up. It seemed that what had seemed impossible 3 months ago was finally actually progressing. The teachers were still complaining and uncooperative, but the new schedule was in place. We were moving forward on the agriculture program. Crops were getting planted. The devil wasn't happy, though. We had a good team. There were many student missionaries there, many volunteers that were helping me. And when Satan saw he couldn't halt the progress by causing an uncooperative spirit in the native teachers, he decided to cause strife among the volunteers. Serious misunderstandings, hurt feelings. It bothered me, of course, but I wasn't involved, so that was soon settled, though. But next, it was my turn. And in one day, I had 3 people, foreign volunteers, that should be working with me, very upset, and with me directly with the way that things were going. As I went to my room that night and poured my heart and my eyes out to God, I was distinctly impressed that this was nothing more than Satan trying to discourage me. And that was what I was impressed through the whole experience, really, that this was the Lord's work, and Satan was going to do everything he could to discourage. So after weeks of work on new teacher handbooks, school policies, documentation, board meetings, not my favorite thing in the world, but we began implementing these as official for the school, and it seemed we had a good foundation laid, finally. I had 3 weeks left out of the 5 months that I was spending there, and I decided that we should hold a 2-week True Education seminar for the teachers and the staff at Kibidula to close out my time there. We had a lot of infrastructure in place. Hopefully some more training would get the teachers on board, and we could continue those changes even after I left. Well, evidently Satan didn't like that plan either. Just before we started the seminar, one of the volunteers, a key person in the new program, unexpectedly had to leave the country. And then another day later, another volunteer was taken sick. And on May 18, the second day of the seminar, another volunteer and close friend of mine was sick. He had just texted me and said, I'm not going to be able to make it today. I said, well, we're a little short on personnel, but we'll keep moving forward. And so that day, as I walked out of the office, my mind was busy planning all the things that I was going to do in the remaining 3 weeks. A couple minutes later, I saw that motorcycle coming around the curve in front of me. And in that split second I had to react, I went the wrong way. And the next I remember was a pain-filled trip to the hospital. Shattered leg bone, multiple injuries. The 2 remaining volunteers at the school were now helping me. And I was flown in an emergency medical flight to a city 10 hours drive away. 2 days later, another emergency medical flight was made for the other volunteer that was remaining there. The first time in the 30-year history of Kibidula, 2 medical flights were made on the same weekend. Both of them were helping at the school. In one day, every person that was volunteering and helping at the school was removed. Do you think Satan was happy with the changes we were making? Hardly. That's how Satan works, though, doesn't he? First, he'll place discouraging circumstances in our path, apparent impossibilities. And if those fail, he seeks to inspire an uncooperative spirit among the workers. Next, he'll cause internal strife. Failing that, he'll directly attack those who are leading out in the reforms. I don't mean to focus on myself here, but this story and experience really impressed something on my mind. We serve an all-powerful God, do we not? But we also have a very powerful enemy. One who is determined to hinder us in the work that the Lord has given us to do. And the more focused we are on the work of the Lord, the more focused he's going to be on us. The devil is focused on us, on hindering us. Was the work of John the Baptist easy? He stood rebuking evil, seeking to point people to Jesus, only to find himself cast aside, the popular opinion swayed in favor of another leader. How do you think he felt as he sat rotting in Herod's dungeon? Alone, maybe? Abandoned? Tempted to discouragement? We know he was tempted to discouragement. Was it easy? No. His work was hard. Did it end well for John? Well, from a worldly perspective, not really. From a heavenly perspective, all was okay, though. But was John right? Was he in the right? He absolutely was. But why am I mentioning John the Baptist? Why am I telling this story? Well, are we called to a work like John the Baptist? Are we called to be reformers in our day? We read that just such a work as that of John is to be carried on in these last days. If we turn to, briefly, I forgot my Bible again. Let's turn to Malachi 4. We know these verses well, but let's just read them. Malachi chapter 4 and verse 6. Actually, we'll look at verses 5 and 6. Are we there? Malachi chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Who is this prophecy referring to? John. Yes, this was a prophecy referring to John. Was this a dual prophecy, though? It was. How do we know that? Well, what is the great and dreadful day of the Lord? Was that the first or second coming of Jesus? This was the second coming of Jesus. So not only was this referring to John the Baptist coming for the first coming of Jesus, this was also referring to the second coming of Jesus, Elijah the prophet. What was his work? He shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to the fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. And then we read in Luke, where we have the fulfillment of that prophecy. In Luke, we can turn there, in Luke 1:17. That was John 1:17. Let's get Luke. Luke 1:17. He, This is speaking of John the Baptist. This is how we know that prophecy was talking about John the Baptist. He shall go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. That was the work, to prepare a people. How? To turn the hearts. Turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the children to the fathers. At this period in Earth's history, do we need a people prepared for the coming of the Lord? We do. Our world is falling apart. Jesus is coming soon. We must prepare. We must be ready. But what was that work involved with preparing a people for the coming of the Lord? It was a turning of the hearts of the fathers to the children to the fathers. It was a work to restore the family. A work to restore the family is that work that is going to prepare a people for the last days. Have we heard a lot of reminders this weekend about the importance of the family? About the importance of restoring this witness? It certainly is. Why do you think, though, that this was the work to prepare a people for the last days? Well, here's a big clue. The greatest evidence of the power of Christianity that can be presented to the world is a well-ordered, well-disciplined family. This will recommend the truth as nothing else can, for it is a living witness of its practical power upon the heart. The influence of a well-ordered, well-disciplined family is far greater for good than is the influence of powerful sermons from the pulpit. And we heard last night about the importance of, about our calling to spread the gospel, right? And so in our day and age, we immediately think, oh, well, I need to go and start preparing some sermons. We have an even greater sermon here, though, in our families. A well-ordered, well-disciplined family. It's as if you had a toolbox that someone gave you to accomplish a job. And in there were several tools that could be used. And there was one tool, though, that was labeled, this is your most important tool. Use this one most of the time. This one will make the biggest difference. And would you be very intelligent to just say, well, that tool must not be very important? No, right? It's labeled as important. You would say, okay, I'm going to use this tool as much as possible. Same here, when we look at the tools we've been given to witness, to spread the gospel, the Lord has given this one big tool in His toolbox, in our toolbox, saying, your family has the greatest influence. So, here's a thought question. If this is our greatest influence, if this is the greatest power for the spread of the gospel, is Satan going to just let that one go easily on? He's going to attack with everything he has. Has he been doing that already? Certainly. We could spend the rest of the session looking at Satan's attacks on the family, but here's two, for example. 50% of marriages ending in divorce. 75% of our young people leaving the church. Are these two examples of Satan's attacks on the family? Right there. He's doing all he can. Why? Because he knows that commission that we read last night. Go ye into all the world. Preach the gospel to every creature. But he also knows that the greatest witness is the family. And so he's going to attack that greatest witness. We have a command to be a witness. And at this period in Earth's history, we need to use the greatest witness we have. But the question I want to get to this morning is, will we have difficulty in accomplishing this? I mean, that seems, it's like, you're like, well, of course we will. That's a rhetorical question. Do we think, though, about the difficulty we will face in that? Are we ready to tackle those difficulties? Are we ready to meet them? Are we ready to move forward in spite of those difficulties? If we lived in heaven, we could expect it to be easy, right? But we don't live in heaven. We live in a sin-filled world with an adversary seeking to stop us. So the question is, what is it that will strengthen the family witness? Well, we've seen a few things this weekend. We started Thursday morning with this talk about the tactics of Satan to damage good thinking abilities. This list here of the lack of physical activity, overstimulation, too much study, testing, poor health and nutrition, age segregation, television and electronics, education chiefly of the mind, a lack of training to think, and the early formal education. Are any of these things, is the majority following most of these things? No. Well, depends on which way. I should clarify that question. Is the majority following, is the majority, is the majority not allowing these tactics to influence their families? No. This is not, to say that we're going to work against these tactics is not the majority. The majority are allowing the poor health and nutrition, the age segregation, the television, electronics, and all the rest of them. So, will Satan try to hinder us by keeping these tactics prominent part of our lives? He certainly will try. Will this road be easy as we seek to accomplish these goals? No. Will we feel alone? We will. Doing the right job at the wrong time. We talked about the need to keep our children at home for the first few years of their lives, until 8 to 10. Is that normal and conventional and socially accepted? No. Will that be easy for us to do? Probably not. A few points I'd like to make, 5 actually. We have this call to stand alone, and there's a few specific ways to do this that I've like to talk about this morning. One is that we need to focus on the character in the early years. The world does not focus on character in the early years. In fact, the common saying in the world is, well, you just let them grow up, and once they get older, then you can start working on their characters. That is so backwards, right? We need to focus on the early years. And in fact, society is neglecting to focus on what is most important during the early years. What is most important? We saw this list earlier. Spirituality, cause to effect reasoning, emotion, relationships, behavior management, language skills, memory, moral understanding, conscience development, character development. These important areas of the brain are developing in the first 7 years of a child's life. Does Satan know this? Sure he does. So he says, what can I do to counteract this? Great. I'll get parents distracted on something else. I'll get them to think that the most important thing is their child's academic success early in life, knowing that if he gets them focusing on that, he'll distract them. He'll distract our attention from what really is most important. The future happiness of your families and the welfare of society depend largely upon the physical and moral education which your children receive. When? In the first years of their life. Notice something about this. What 3 areas of education have we discussed this weekend? What are the 3 main areas of education? Physical, mental, spiritual. So the future happiness of your families and the welfare of society depend largely on the physical, moral, and mental education. Is that what that says? There's only 2 areas of education mentioned here. When I first realized that, I said, wait a second, I got to read this again. She always names all 3 areas of education, except when she's speaking of early childhood. And she says the most important part here is the physical and moral education, because the academic can come later. A child's conscience emerges surprisingly early in development. Its foundations are laid in the first 3 years of life. That is according to the Journal of Child Development, a secular research source saying conscience is laid in the first 3 years of life. Amazing to me that they're studying that. But it's also amazing that we are confirming what we already know from the Spirit of Prophecy. The lessons learned, the habits formed during the years of infancy and childhood have more to do with the formation of the character and the direction of the life than have all the instruction and training of after years. We can put all our effort in later on. And that, yes, that can make a difference. That can help, but it's not nearly as effective as what we're doing in the first years of a child's life. How true it is, give me a child until he is 7, and he will be mine forever. Does anyone know where this statement comes from? Who penned these words? Catholic Church, yes. You heard from Scott how the Order of the Jesuits was begun as a counter-reformation to found schools to counteract the work of the Reformation. And it was they who knew this. Give me a child, they said, until he is 7, and we've got him forever. That's frightening, really. Are we going to allow Satan to have our children until they're 7 so that they will be his forever? No. Let's focus on the early years, despite what the society around us is doing. The future of the rising generation is in the hands of the parents. For in a great measure, they hold within their control the destiny of their children for time and for eternity. The salvation of the young depends almost wholly upon the training they receive when? in childhood. So when is our focus? It should be in childhood. Unlike what the world does, let's focus on where it counts the most. And as an aside, I think we spend too much energy, too much money on fixing problems when we could be preventing them. And I'm speaking here of our youth programs. I'm glad we have youth programs in our church. I don't want to be critical of them. But if we think that they are going to do the job of helping our children be converted, we've waited way too long. The responsibility rests with the families. Youth programs may be a help. Sometimes they're not. Be careful. But we need to realize that the most important time is in the early years. So we can focus on character in the early years, unlike what the world does. Another thing that we'll have to work against, we'll have to stand alone on this, is limiting our children's media consumption, because it is just everywhere. You can't get away from it almost. You saw these stats earlier that 8 to 12 hours per day is the average for young people. 75% of children aged 0 to 8 have access to a smartphone. And actually, that's an old stat. Just a couple of days ago, Common Sense Media came out with a new study, and that number has gone up now. Nearly 40% of children using tablets, and yet we know it's starving children of essential brain development. It's causing attention deficit disorders, reading and listening problems, eye and brain damage. We know that the research is showing to keep it at a minimum or even eliminate it under the age of 12. Is this normal? No, this is not what the world is encouraging us to do. Well, we have to stand alone on this. We will. And just as a funny little side point here, remember that if your child can use a smartphone, he can easily operate any of the above. The world thinks it's child abuse to make your child do laundry. But 25 years ago, that was normal. We can't look at what's normal around us, because if we do, that's going to be continually changing. Let's keep our priorities in the right place. I don't have time to get into it, but many times parents are the ones spending too much time on the media, keeping themselves away from the time they should be devoting to character development. Point number 3, we need to make character our primary focus. This is linked to that the first point there of focusing on character in the early years. But all throughout the child's life, we need to make character the primary focus, because society says grades are the most important, academic success, careers, what kind of job are they going to get? Worldly success is the most important to society today. And we as a people can say that is not our focus. We are going to focus on character development. Any of you ever gone on a long trip somewhere? I'm sure we all have, at least somewhat of a long trip. And so you're packing up. Can you take everything you own when you're getting the car packed? No. And in fact, the bigger the family, the less each person gets to take, right? So maybe you're packing up and you're telling everyone, all right, one suitcase, that's all you get. And so the children decide what they're going to bring, and they decide on those things probably that they need when they get to their destination. You're deciding on those things that you need when you get to your destination. But suppose you're going on a trip. This time you're going to fly. And you don't have an airline's credit card, and so you get charged for checked baggage. So you're just going to do a carry-on, just a little suitcase. And you're going to be gone for a month, though. Think about that. Would the importance of what you're putting in your suitcase go up a little bit? It would. The value of the items you're placing in there would really pertain to how much they're needed when you get to your destination. Suppose, though, you're going to go somewhere. Suppose you're going to China for a year. And the travel agency said, no luggage allowed. You can only carry one item in your hand. So would you just walk around the house and grab some random trinket off the shelf and head off to China? No, you'd probably lose sleep over this, wouldn't you? You would agonize, what is the one thing I can take with me? And probably when you made the decision, you might do a lot of research. And when you finally made your decision, that item that you're bringing with you would probably be something that you could not get at your destination. And you also needed it at your destination. Am I correct? That's probably how you make that decision. Are we on a journey to a far country? How much luggage do we get to take with us? None. We can't even carry anything in our hands. The only thing we can bring with us is our character. Is our character pretty important? Because when we get to the pearly gates of heaven, the Lord will not ask us how many PhDs we have. He will not ask us how we did in algebra class. He will ask us how the character is of us and the children that we were entrusted with. A character formed according to the divine likeness is the only treasure we can take from this world to the next. How important, then, is the development of character in this life? Character building is the most important work ever entrusted to human beings. And never before was its diligent study so important as now. See, God is so much more interested in preparing us for heaven than Harvard. Well, academic skills, I'm going to skip through this. I see my time ticking. We're going to move to point number 4. Parents, recognize and accept that this is your primary job. Other things are secondary to parenting. They've done study, the Barna Research Group, you heard Scott mention that last night, found that successful Christian parents they saw parenting as their primary job. They did not leave the discipling of their children to the church or the school. We live in a society that wants to hire somebody else to do it for us. We want to outsource our children's education. We want to outsource the academic training to the school. We want to outsource the spiritual training to the church. Heard of a gentleman recently that didn't have time to spend with his child, and so he hired a psychologist to take care of the emotional part of things. All 3 areas being outsourced. Successful Christian parents also accepted that they would be countercultural. They just knew that they would be different. And they accepted that. And when they accepted it, it became easier for them. Where is our focus? Is it on the things of this world? Is it on fitting in? Is it on the latest technology, keeping up with our neighbors, filling important church positions, succeeding in your career, getting a college degree? These things might have their place, but they pale in significance to the importance of the work of the parent. Not until the final settlement, when the cases of all will be decided and the acts of our entire lives laid open to our view in the presence of God and the Lamb and all the holy angels, will parents realize the almost infinite value of misspent time. Point number 5, stay at home, moms. Now here's one that really flies in the face of society today. We will stand almost alone in doing this many times. It is becoming more common, I realize that, but still, it is not normal. We've got to realize how incredibly important it is, though. Research has shown, secular science shows that families with one full-time parent, typically the mother, typically raise more successful children. Maternal employment by the 9th month, so the mother has a baby, 9 months later they're back at work, is linked to lower school readiness at 36 months. Long-term effects there. Single-income families have a high percentage of spiritually strong young adults. Does it have to do with their income, or does it have to do with that there's one staying at home with the children? And again, typically this is the mother staying home in the research. The work of the mother is incredibly important. I don't have time to explain it all, but they've done studies on rats, on monkeys, where they separate them from their mother. They separated infant rats from their mothers for 24 hours, and the rate of apoptosis, which is the neurons in the brain dying off, that's normal part of childhood. There's some efficiency, some pruning that goes on in the brain. But obviously too much isn't good either. And they found with 24 hours of maternal separation, the rate of apoptosis doubled. Literally killing brain cells by separating infants from their mothers. And part of the brain known as the hypothalamus, which controls the endocrine system, autonomic nervous system, behavior, metabolism, growth and development. I'm not saying it totally controls those things, but very important for those things. They find actual physiological damage to the hypothalamus in monkeys when they separate them from their mothers. The hippocampus, which helps control memory, spatial navigation, behavior, and emotion. Just a few hours of maternal separation in monkeys would damage this area of the brain. Nerve cells in the hippocampus are destroyed as a result of chronic stress and elevated stress hormone levels. When you take an infant away from their mother, we immediately see the stress levels begin to go up. and producing intellectual deficits as a consequence. Children with the lowest scores on mental and motor ability tests have been shown to be the ones with the highest cortisol levels in their blood. Where did that cortisol come from? Maternal separation. We see that go up immediately with maternal separation. The quality of attachments between infants and their mothers has significant consequences for relationships at later stages of life. Children who are securely attached as infants tend to be more socially and emotionally competent later, and others view them more positively. This is, again, from the book, Journal of Child Development. Opportunities of inestimable worth. We saw some secular science there saying that we would damage the brain by separating mother and child. But we've known this for a long time. Opportunities of inestimable worth. How much is inestimable? Unmeasurable. You can't put a price on it. You can't break this down and say this is worth this and this is worth that, and so we put an estimate on it. No, that's impossible. In fact, they've tried, and they come up with ridiculous salaries for mothers if they were to actually pay them for everything they did. Thank you, Mom. The Lord has not called you to neglect your home and husband and children. He never works this way, and He never will. If you feel you are called to a work other than your home, that is not the Lord's calling. Never for a moment suppose that God has given you a work that will necessitate a separation from your precious little flock. The king upon his throne has no higher work than has a mother. She has in her power the molding of her children's characters that they may be fitted for the higher immortal life. An angel could not ask for a higher mission, for in doing this work she is doing service for God. Let her only realize the high character of her task, and it will inspire her with courage. Let her realize the worth of her work and put on the whole armor of God that she may resist the temptation to conform to the world's standard. Notice that sentence. Resist what? The temptation to conform to the world's standard. That is what Satan is pressing upon us. Look at everybody around you. Look how they're doing. And look how weird you are. Can't you just be normal? Stop acting so strange. Resist that temptation to conform to the world's standard, because your work is for time and for eternity. Do you want a life work, a mission? God has given you one in the raising of your children. Do you want an influence? You have the most influential position attainable in God's eyes. Do you want to be a power for good? Well, next to God, you are the strongest power for good in the world. Do you want to be a leader? Lead your children to Christ. Do you want to bear responsibilities, great responsibilities? God has blessed you with a responsibility above all others. Do you wish to demonstrate the power of Christianity to the world? God has told us that the training of children is part of God's plan to do this. It is the greatest witness for the power of Christianity. Do you aspire to missionary service, mothers? Well, if you're faithful as a mother, God will record your name as one of the greatest of missionaries. Do you wish for the accolades given to men's work? Well, God will reward your faithfulness to your calling with heavenly honor. Do you want a great work to do? Your work is greater than the king on his throne. You're not going to find a greater work. It doesn't exist. Do you wish you could just go be an angel? Wouldn't that be easier? Well, if you could, you would ask to be a mother again, because angels could not ask for a higher mission. When the judgment shall sit, the book shall be opened. When the well done of the great judge is pronounced and the crown of immortal glory is placed upon the brow of the victor, many will raise their crowns in sight of the assembled universe, and pointing to their mother, say, "She made me all I am through the grace of God. Her instruction, her prayers have been blessed to my eternal salvation." Is there anything more important than this? I ask you. There is not. It does not exist. Will it be worth any sacrifice to reach this point? We should view it that way. We could go through many stories of sacrifice that I've talked with various mothers in my travels. I'm just thinking of several here. I was with a family in Australia recently, and the mother wanted to stay home with her children, and they just really cut back on the expenses as much as they could. The mother did not have a driver's license because that cost a little bit of money that could have made her have to go work. That's radical, you say. That's crazy. Did she have her eyes on her prize? Are we somehow afraid that God's plan won't work? Are we somehow afraid that God gives us this precious treasure in our families and we say, Lord, I can't really afford that. I need to go work. Is God's hand slack? Has he lost all those cows on his hills? He has unlimited resources. So where's our faith? Let's just place it in God and move forward despite the pressure around us. No one said this would be easy. God never said it would be easy. There will be hard decisions, sacrifices to make, but it will be worth it in the end. Are these things easy? No. Will we stand alone in making these decisions? Probably. I want to consider a few of the Bible characters in closing here. Did the Bible characters live easy lives where they just went with the flow of society and everybody supported them and it was all easy? No, not at all. It is our call to stand alone. The Lord has given us this call. He never said, I want you to join the crowd. He said, no, I want you to stand for your beliefs, though it may be alone. Satan knows that the Great Commission is a direct attack on his kingdom, and so he will do everything in his power to counteract the most powerful witness that we have in our arsenal in the form of godly families. Did you catch that? Satan knows that the Great Commission is a direct attack on his kingdom, and so he will do everything in his power to hinder the work of the greatest weapon we have in our arsenal in the form of godly families. If you feel like you're the only one living in the country, following the simple way of life, quietly reaching out to people on your trips to the grocery store, well, you're in good company with Enoch. If everyone thinks you're weird, they thought Enoch was pretty weird. If you feel like nobody understands you, well, they probably didn't understand Enoch either. The things he talked about weren't normal. He couldn't hold a normal conversation about the latest antediluvian TV show. Did he let that change him? No. Did he conform? No. He walked with God. And he was not. Do you want to be translated like Enoch? To be a part of the 144,000? Was it easy for Enoch? No. Was it worth it? It was really worth it. He got a 5,000-year head start on the kingdom of heaven. That was really worth it. If you feel like you're the only one who believes Jesus is coming soon, and the only one who says we must prepare, and as you move to the country, grow your own garden, people say you're crazy, well, you're in good company with Noah. He, no doubt, felt as if he and his family were the only ones who believed the way they did. Standing against the entire world were 8 people. The world is ending, he said. Get ready. What an alarmist this guy was. All the world, Noah's church included, was insulted by Noah's preaching. They laughed at him. But was Noah right? He was. Was it easy? No. If you have to leave your family and your friends to isolate your children from bad influences around you, you're in good company with Abraham. If you're facing the need to leave the city, needing to make major decisions for the good of your family, but you don't see how it can possibly work out, Abraham faced that too. Are you faced with losing your job? Abraham lost his. Are you faced with losing your home? Abraham lost his. You don't know what the future holds? Abraham didn't know that either. Suppose you here at UCHI, this is a great example. Suppose Dr. Mark here felt impressed by the Lord. Maybe he received a dream one night. And he was impressed that UCHI needed to pack up and move. And so the next morning, it's Monday morning, you here that work at UCHI receive a group email to all UCHI staff, we're moving in a week, pack your bags. And you're like, wow, okay, this is exciting. Maybe some of you would be terrified, maybe some of you would be excited. But you trust that Dr. Mark's got it all under control, right? And so you send a quick email back, great, where are we going? And he responds, I don't know, we're just leaving. Would you be excited at that point? You'd probably be a little more terrified than excited. Are we faced with that kind of crazy decision? Probably not. We probably can have a little bit of a clue where we're going and how the Lord is leading us. God told Abraham, pack up and leave. Everybody, how many staff do we have here at UG, Dr. Mark? Around 55. Abraham had a lot more than that. So this was a major operation. We are not faced with that. But did that stop Abraham? He said, nope, off we go. I trust the Lord is leading. It was no light test that was thus brought upon Abraham, no small sacrifice that was required of him. There were strong ties to bind him to his country, his kindred, and his home, but he did not hesitate to obey the call. He had no question to ask concerning the land of promise, whether the soil was fertile and the climate healthful, whether the country offered agreeable surroundings and would afford opportunities for amassing wealth. God had spoken, and his servant must obey. And the happiest place on earth for him was the place where God would have him to be. Many are still tested, as was Abraham. They do not hear the voice of God speaking directly from the heavens, but he calls them by the teachings of his word and the events of his providence. They may be required to abandon a career that promises wealth and honor, to leave congenial and profitable associations and separate from kindred, to enter upon what appears to be only a path of self-denial, hardship, and sacrifice. God has a work for them to do, but a life of ease and the influence of friends and kindred would hinder the development of the very traits essential for its accomplishment. He calls them away from human influences and aid, to stand alone. He leads them to feel the need of his help, to depend on him alone, that he may reveal himself to them. Who is ready, at the call of providence, to renounce cherished plans and familiar associations? Who is ready? Was it easy for Abraham? No, it wasn't. If you're feeling alone, but you're in the situation because of your own mistakes, then you're in good company with Jacob. He fled from his home, hated by his own brother, but there was still mercy from God, wasn't there? I'm running out of time. Have you been misunderstood, accused of ulterior motives, despised by your family? Well, you're in good company with Joseph. He was just trying to politely point out some poor decisions his brothers had made. He was just innocently sharing some interesting dreams he had. Why did his brothers hate him so much? He just longed for their sympathy. He wasn't trying to be difficult, but they rejected him. They hated him. Are you in a situation completely out of your control, and it wasn't your fault that you're now in this situation? Joseph was. Joseph, with his captors, was on the way to Egypt. The boy could discern in the distance the hills among which lay his father's tents. Bitterly he wept at the thought of that loving father and his loneliness and affliction. The stinging, insulting words that had met his agonized entreatings at Dothan were ringing in his ears. With a trembling heart, he looked forward to the future, alone and friendless. What would be his lot in the strange land to which he was going? For a time, Joseph gave himself up to uncontrolled grief and terror. Imagine yourself in this situation, how alone you would feel. Would you be tempted to just give up? Whatever happens, happens. I can do nothing about this. Did Joseph give up? Then his thoughts turned to his father's God. His soul thrilled with a high resolve to prove true to God, to act as a subject of the King of Heaven. He would meet the trials of his lot with fortitude and perform every duty with fidelity, alone though he may be. Are your ideas flying in the face of the educated people around you? Well, that's what Moses faced in Egypt. Against the most educated men of the day, the PhDs, the most refined and cultured nation on earth, Moses stood alone. Is your family against you? Are they complaining about the way you're doing things? Well, Moses had an entire nation complaining about the way he was doing things. As an interesting contrast, though, consider Aaron's approach to the complaints of those around him. He wanted to get along, right? And so he built the golden calf. People said, that we're told in Patriarchs and Prophets, that people complained about the way Moses was leading. They said he was too negative. He was always rebuking their sins. Why couldn't he just be a little more friendly about things? Aaron wanted to get along. Who was in the right, though? Do you have faith that the difficulties you're facing could be overcome by the power of God, but no one else agrees with you? Well, you're in good company with Joshua and Caleb. The difficulty seemed impossible to everyone. They alone could see by faith. Do you think they were tempted to second-guess themselves? Is someone about to stone you for believing in the power of God? That's what Joshua and Caleb faced. And yet, they alone entered the promised land. Was it easy? Oh, there's so many examples we could give. How about the children of Israel? Are you faced with moving forward and yet the way has not opened? That's what the children of Israel faced on the banks of the Jordan River. God hasn't opened the door. Look, there's a river in front of us, they could have said. And God said, no, move forward, put your feet in that river, and then I'll open the way. Sometimes we have to move forward by faith before the Lord opens that door. Have you had some success at convincing some around you to follow the Lord's ways, but they're just not being consistent? The world has had too strong a pull on your friends, and you see them drifting. Will you drift too? Or will you join Joshua as he told everyone, you can choose what you will, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Do you feel like you're the only one holding on to the old ways? Do you feel old-fashioned? Is everyone pushing to be more like the world? You're in good company with Samuel as they clamored for a king. Are you faced with an absolute impossibility that there is no human way out? These are dire circumstances. What will you do? Join Jonathan and his armor bearer as they say there's no restraint to the Lord to save by many or few. Man's extremity is God's opportunity. Move forward. Defeat the difficulties because the Lord can save you even if you are completely alone. Are you having a hard time and all your friends think the reason you're struggling is your own fault? Have we ever experienced that? Are your friends offering solutions but you know they're wrong? Well, you're in good company with Job. He lost everything. His money, his belongings, his children. The future looked bleak. His friends said it was his fault. They criticized him. Even his wife was against him. Do you think he felt alone? He really felt alone. He was alone. But, in fact, he was currently the center of attention for the entire universe. Those times that we feel like we are the only ones standing is when God and the universe is looking on, waiting to see what decision we will make. That should encourage us to move forward. Has your whole church apostatized? Do you feel that everyone else has turned against God's way? Well, hear Elijah as he says, I'm the only one left. Watch him as he stands alone against the prophets in his decree of no rain. His word stood against every other, and he made their lives miserable in the process. 3.5 years later, he's still alone as he's called the troubler of Israel. Still alone, he stands on Mount Carmel against the king, against the prophets, against the entire nation. One lone prophet, standing against everything normal and accepted in his day. But was he right? Are you the only one preaching the message of truth and everyone hates you for it? Do you wonder how long it will last? Isaiah wondered the same. Does everyone think you're just too negative? That's what people thought about Jeremiah. It wasn't fashionable to do right. Are you afraid that people will think the way you eat is strange? Well, dare to be a Daniel. Dare to stand alone. Daniel was willing to die before he ate unhealthfully. You know, vegan's now kind of the social thing to do. That's become a little more normal. You can find a vegan restaurant in most cities, maybe a few of them. That wasn't why Daniel did it. He did it because he knew it was right. Are you worried people will think you're weird if you pray in a public place? Daniel got thrown in the lion's den because he prayed in a public place. Do you feel like you stick out like a sore thumb? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego probably felt like a sore thumb standing up on the plain of Dura while everyone else was bowing down to the image. Really, they could have bent down and just faced the other direction and nobody would have ever noticed. But they stood alone, willing to be mocked, condemned, and burnt rather than sway from principle in the slightest. Do you feel impolite, out of place in a social setting because you don't conform to social norms? Join Mordecai as he holds his head high among the people bowing to Haman. Couldn't he just be polite? Have you stood alone rebuking evil, pointing people to Jesus to find yourself in a dungeon? Join John the Baptist. Are you working to spread the gospel, and is the way hard? Are you persecuted, beaten, imprisoned, stoned? That's what Paul was doing. Are your friends gone? Are you truly alone, by yourself? John was, as he sat on that lonely island in Patmos. He had fought a good fight. He had run the race. He had preached the gospel. He had served the Lord with his whole heart from his youth. And what was now his situation? Stranded, exiled to Patmos. You think he was tempted to be discouraged? But the Lord took his being alone to give one of the greatest revelations that we have known, ever given to man. In every age, God has called his servants to lift up their voices against the prevailing errors and sins of the multitude. Noah was called to stand alone to warn the antediluvian world. Moses and Aaron were alone against king and princes, magicians and wise men, and the multitudes of Egypt. Elijah was alone when he testified to an apostate king and a backsliding people. Daniel and his fellows stood alone against the decrees of mighty monarchs. The majority are usually to be found on the side of error and falsehood. The fact that doctors of divinity have the world on their side does not prove them to be on the side of truth and God. The wide gate and broad road attract the multitudes, while the straight gate and narrow way are sought by only a few. We didn't need to even stop, though, with John at the end of the Bible. Look through the history of this world. Think of the Waldenses. Did they stand alone? They were willing to send their children out alone, knowing they probably would never see them again. Are we willing to take that stand? Those who stand in defense of the honor of God and maintain the purity of truth at any cost will have manifold trials. Those who are in harmony with God and who through faith in him receive strength to resist wrong and stand in defense of the right will always have severe conflicts. Sometimes, always have severe conflicts. And will frequently have to stand almost alone. For his church, in every generation, God has a special truth and a special work. Does he have a special truth and a special work for us now, in this generation? He does. The truth that is hid from the worldly wise and prudent is revealed to the childlike and humble. It calls for self-sacrifice. It has battles to fight and victories to win. At the outset, its advocates are few. By the great men of the world and by the world-conforming church, they are opposed and despised. See John the Baptist, the forerunner of Christ, standing alone to rebuke the pride and formalism of the Jewish nation. See the first bearers of the gospel into Europe. How obscure, how hopeless seemed the mission of Paul and Silas, the two tent makers, as they with their aged companions took ship for Troas at Philippi. See Paul the aged in chains, preaching Christ in the stronghold of the Caesars. See the little communities of slaves and peasants in conflict with the heathenism of imperial Rome. See Martin Luther, one of my favorites, withstanding that mighty church, which is the masterpiece of the world's wisdom. See him holding fast God's word against emperor and pope, declaring, "Here I take my stand. I cannot do otherwise. God be my help." And that is our last point I'd like to make. In our difficulty, in our feelings of being alone, are we truly alone? Think of Martin Luther. He felt alone. This is a quote. Martin Luther himself said, "How many times have I not asked myself with bitterness, 'Art thou alone wise? Can everyone else be mistaken? How many times have you felt this way? Am I the only one who thinks this is right? Surely something's wrong here. I must be missing something because everyone else disagrees with me. That's how Martin Luther felt. And yet, to the reproaches of his enemies, who taunted him with the weakness of his cause, Luther answered, "They say I am alone. No, for Jehovah is with me." In their sense, Moses was alone at the departure from Egypt. Elijah was alone at the reign of King Ahab. Isaiah was alone in Jerusalem. Ezekiel was alone in Babylon. I do not say that I'm a prophet, but I do say that they ought to fear precisely because I am alone. While on the side of the oppressor are numbers, caste, wealth, and mocking letters. Yes, I am alone, but I stand serene because side by side with me is the word of God. And with all their boasted numbers, this, the greatest of powers, is not with them. Are we really alone? No, we are in the majority. If we were the only person in the 8 billion people in this world who stood for the truth, we would still be in the majority. Because we are a spectacle to the universe. We may feel alone. Satan is there to tell us that we are the only ones that are so particular, so strange, so weird, and so unlike everyone else. But we are not alone because we have angels helping us, working with us, protecting us, and guiding us. In closing, fellow Christian, Satan knows your weakness. Therefore, cling to Jesus. Abiding in God's love, you may stand every test. The righteousness of Christ alone can give you power to stem the tide of evil that is sweeping over the world. Bring faith into your experience. Faith lightens every burden, relieves every weariness. Providences that are now mysterious you may solve by continued trust in God. Walk by faith in the path He marks out. Trials will come, but go forward. This will strengthen your faith and fit you for service. The records of sacred history are written, not merely that we may read and wonder, but that the same faith which wrought in God's servants of old may work in us. These Bible characters have no advantage that we cannot have ourselves. We can have that same faith. We can have the same guide, the same God, the same angels, the same Holy Spirit helping us. In no less marked manner will the Lord work now, wherever there are hearts of faith to be channels of His power. Though the way may be dark, the path unclear, you have a light for the step that's in front of you. Make the choice to decide on what you now know. I was talking with Isaac Santos a couple of days ago, and he said, our problem isn't knowledge. Our problem is that, yes, there's always more to learn. There's always more knowledge to gain. I recognize that. But it's not our problem. This is not a hindrance to our moving forward. Our problem is actually moving out upon what we do know, because we have tremendous light already given us. And as we take that step into the light that we have, as we move forward, that little lamp we are holding will cast a glow on the next step. And we can continually move forward in the light of God's presence. Let's pray. Father in heaven, it is a privilege to stand alone, because we know that as we stand against the world, we are standing on your side. We thank you that you've given us so much encouragement, so much information, so much light. And I pray, Lord, you'll help us to step forward, to not question the way in the distance, but to move with the light that we have right now. And we trust that you'll lead us into even greater light as we follow the light you've now given us. Thank you for the time we've had this morning, and I ask, Lord, that your blessing on the remainder of the sessions, the question and answer, and everything that's happening this morning. We continue to ask for your presence, and we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.